children separated from their families, the truths, the lies, and all the many failures, as well as a discussion on parenting and fatherhood. I'm Vong, and this is A Civil Moment.
Have you seen the photos of children in cages? Have you heard the audio clip of these children wailing that just came out today?
I have not seen something that came out today, but I have been to detention centers. And again, I would reference you to our standards. I would reference you to the care provided, not just by the Department of Homeland Security, but by the Department of Health and Human Services when they get to HHS.
But is that the image of this country that you want out there, children in
The image
cages?
that I want of this country is an immigration system that secures our borders and upholds our humanitarian ideals. Congress needs to fix it.
That is the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen, being questioned by ABC reporter Cecilia Vega. The Trump administration is under fire for the images that have been in the news lately, showing the children of illegal immigrants being separated from their parents. Social media is up in arms, the traditional media is up in arms, and there seems to be a tremendous amount of outrage over the treatment of these children coming from all sides, and it is creating a divide even amongst Republicans and the GOP. Unfortunately, what seems to be happening is that both sides are willing to lie to forward their agenda. And unfortunately, especially lately, it seems like the traditional mainstream media is absolutely willing to twist the truth or tell lies of omission in order to paint the Trump administration in a bad light. And at least in this instance, the administration is doing itself no favors by how it chooses to justify its actions. John Kelly, the president's chief of staff, in an interview last year, said that he had considered the separation of children from their families as a deterrent for illegal immigration. And here's Attorney General Jeff Sessions on the ordeal.
Illegal entry into the United States is a crime. It should be, it must be, if you're going to have a legal system and have any limits whatsoever. Persons who violate the law of our nation are subject to prosecution. If you violate the law, you subject yourself to prosecution.
So far, so good, but he continues.
And I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government because God has ordained the government for his purposes.
I completely agree that the borders must be secure. I completely agree that the law must be upheld. And I completely agree that there should be repercussions for those breaking the law. And while it is clear that violating those borders by illegally crossing is a violation of law, I can't be the only one who finds it at least a bit distasteful that the Bible is being used to justify the act of separating children from their families. Before we go any further, I think it would be useful to go back and try to gather what facts we can and point out where mistruths and half-truths are being passed off as the entire truth. So the first question is, why are the children being separated from the families in the first place? By U.S. law, if an adult with children is being incarcerated while they are being tried for a crime, their children cannot be incarcerated with them. This is true not just for illegal immigrants, but anybody committing a crime in the United States. When a parent goes to jail, the children do not go to prison with them. They are separated from their children. This is not a good thing. This is absolutely a tragedy. But to suggest that the administration is the only party at fault is to remove all agency from the adult illegal immigrants who are bringing their children into this country. We'll follow up on that fact a little bit later, but the fact is also that the Obama administration acted under similar circumstances and had similar policies. The major change in policy and why Trump is getting so much flack right now is that he is choosing to treat the people who are committing these crimes as criminals. In the past, when these illegal immigrants would cross somewhere illegally, the Obama administration, to a large degree, treated those as civil cases in the cases where parents were traveling with minor children. So the word got out that if you entered the United States illegally, but you had minor children, you would not be subject to criminal prosecution. What does that do? That incentivizes people to bring children with them illegally into the United States. And there have been cases, not many, but certainly documented cases of illegal immigrants entering the United States with children that are not their own in order to try to get around the immigration system. This has other concerns as well, not the least of which has to deal with human trafficking. An additional fact is the only instances where this is happening occur where people are entering illegally. If an immigrant family shows up at a port of entry and requests asylum, while their case is being heard, they are not being criminally prosecuted, and therefore their children are not being separated from them. But the Obama-era policy incentivizing the bringing of minor children with illegal immigrants caused a rise in the number of illegal immigrant children entering the country in the last 4 years from about 38 per day to over 200 a day, when the Obama administration was criticized for their policies which caused children to be separated from their families. They stated that they needed to enforce the law so that conservatives in Congress would change the law.
The actions I'm taking are not only lawful, they're the kinds of actions taken by every single Republican president and every single Democratic president for the past half century. And to those members of Congress who question my authority to make our immigration system work better, or question the wisdom of me acting where Congress has failed, I have one answer. Pass a bill. I want to work with both parties to pass a more permanent legislative solution. And the day I sign that bill into law, the actions I take will no longer be necessary.
That was President Obama about 4 years ago. Here's President Trump about 4 days ago.
If I might, I just wanted to make a brief statement on immigration and what's happening. And I'll say it very honestly, and I'll say it very straight. Immigration is the fault in all of the problems that we're having, because we cannot get them to sign legislation. We cannot get them even to the negotiating table. And I say it's very strongly the Democrats' fault. They're they're really obstructionist, and they are obstructing.
A sitting president blaming the Congress for failing to pass legislation that would fix the issue. Is there a more iconic duo? It's like peanut butter and jelly, Batman and Robin, or perhaps more like Tom and Jerry. The issue that I have with the way the media is covering this is to take the responsibility out of the people who are actively breaking the law. This is the idea that the government has some kind of supremacy that obviates or makes irrelevant the actions of those people choosing to break the law. And I am talking about the adult illegal immigrants who are bringing children across the border illegally with them. And there's plenty of blame to go around to both administrations. There's always these unintended consequences. The Obama administration decided that it would be better to deal with some of these cases in civil courts, and that created the incentive for people to bring children with them, because they knew that if they brought minor children with them, they would not be criminally prosecuted. They kicked the can down the road, and that goes for both the administration and the Congress that was in power at that time. So at this point, the Trump administration has 200 plus children a day traveling illegally into the United States, and 2,000 of those children have now been separated from their families. And meanwhile, the media is engaged in demagoguery, asking questions like, is this the image of America you want people to see? Everybody is trying to score political points. And meanwhile, nobody has accepted the responsibility for what is happening to those 2,000 children. Because let's be clear, their parents or whoever brought them across the border illegally broke the law. There should be repercussions for that. The Congress, in both Obama's administration's time and Trump's time now, have failed to uphold their duty. And both presidents have either, depending on who you ask, have overstepped their bounds in upholding immigration law or failed to uphold it to the standard and degree necessary to secure the border. And the unwitting pawns in all of this are 2,000 scared children separated from their families. And let's also be clear that if the border were properly secure and entry had not been made illegally, none of this would be happening. This is a symptom of a failure of decades on immigration policy. This is a symptom of decades of failing to secure the border. And like every administration prior, the can is being kicked down the road. It started as a problem of hundreds of thousands, and now we are at 13 million illegal immigrants. And there's no shortage of people willing to get in front of a camera, waving the picture of a child and yelling out, "Think of the children." But of course, ignore the 800,000 children that this and prior administration have already failed. Only concentrate on these 2,000 now, because this is the image that should be in your head when you go to the polls this November. Because once again, this is what it's all about. It's about scoring a political point. The people that say they care for these children, that care what happened to them, care more about political expediency than the actual well-being of these children. Otherwise, there would be laws passed today. Instead, you have people like Michael Hayden, former CIA director, tweeting out pictures of Birkenau at the Auschwitz concentration camp in Nazi-occupied Poland, saying other governments have separated mothers from children. If that's not demagoguery, then I don't know what is. He followed it up with the standard non-apology apology, quote, "If I overachieved by comparing it to Birkenau, I apologize to anyone who may have felt offended." The Trump administration is not being 100% truthful when it says that the reasons for these separations are entirely the fault of the previous administration. Neither is it 100% truthful to suggest that this is solely the act and result of the Trump administration's policy on dealing with these illegal immigrants. When you talk about 800,000 minors whose fate in the United States is up in the air, it's hard to form a personal connection with an anonymous 800,000. It's even hard to form a connection with 2,000 children. But when you can parade around a picture of 5 children or 1 child and give it a name and show it screaming, you are asking someone to form an emotional connection with that particular plight. But the government cannot make policy off of the emotional appeal over an image or a video of 1 child. When the government makes policy at the federal level, it must take into account the needs of its 300+ million citizens, and to a substantial extent, the welfare of the entire world as well. But those images are designed to get an emotional response. It is to get people up in arms. It is to get ratings. It is to get clicks. It is exactly the wrong thing to do when rational decision-making is necessary. Now, that's not to say that we make light of or disregard the suffering of those children and their parents. Without reservation, we can say that that is a terrible situation that is abhorrent to the human spirit, whether or not the parents are complicit in the breaking of the law, whether the parents knew what they were doing when they broke the law, whether or not the Obama or Trump administration had anything to do with the separating of those children from their parents. It is a terrible situation that must be remedied. But that is to say, we cannot remedy the situation merely for the children and the families thrust into our consciousness on TV by people who wish to get an emotional response from us. We must remedy them for the ones who don't have names. We must remedy them for the ones who have not yet been put in that situation. We must remedy it so that this situation does not repeat itself. Because today there are those 2,000 children so far that we are made aware of. But every day, 200 more children cross illegally into this country through its unsecured borders. And to do nothing is to incentivize a further larger amount from doing the same until we must take actions that are even more onerous than the ones already being undertaken. As Ronald Reagan said, a nation that cannot control its borders is not a nation. And until we can secure this nation's borders, we risk the unsavory decisions that we have to make between separating children from their families or not upholding the law and incentivizing more adults to bring children into this country illegally and compounding and exacerbating the problem. It's unfortunate that this occurrence coincides with Father's Day, and hopefully the children who have been separated from their fathers and mothers will be reunited before too long. And that's also an important thing to note, that the reunification does happen. Nobody is being permanently separated from their children or from their parents, which of course makes the parallels being drawn not just by Michael Hayden but by others to concentration camps all that much more distasteful. But now let's turn our attention to the fathers living in the United States. There are some 70 million fathers living across the nation. 2 million of those are single fathers. That is a much smaller number than the number of single mothers in the United States. There are some 11.5 million single mothers raising children in the United States. And unfortunately for society and our culture, that has some pretty negative effects. Fatherless children are at a dramatically greater risk of drug and alcohol abuse, and there is significantly more drug use among children who do not live with both their mother and father. Children who are born to single mothers show much higher levels of aggressive behavior than children born to married mothers. And sadly, children of single-parent homes are more than twice as likely to commit suicide. And economically, the children living in female-headed families with no spouse present had a poverty rate of 47.6%, which is over 4 times the rate in married couple families. There's a tendency in the culture to celebrate single motherhood. And there's no doubt that there are a lot of single mothers out there who are busting their tails, who are heroically running their families despite difficulties and the odds being stacked against them. But it's clear that children thrive in an environment where there is both a mother and father present, which is not to say that there aren't single mothers who have raised amazing people, and not even to say that that is the exception and not the norm. But there's no doubt that having both a mother and father means that the outcome for the child as it traverses into adulthood is much more likely to be positive. And let's be frank, raising a human being from a child into an adult is an extremely complicated, difficult task, especially since many of us aren't really quite sure we are ourselves good human beings, let alone know how to raise a good human being from a child. And outside of tragedy, or unless we are tragically terrible at raising children, one way or the other, good or bad, the children are going to turn into adults. And the role of any parent who is interested in raising their children properly is to prepare that child to exist in the world without them. That is to say that a young adult has got to be able to make decisions for themselves and set their own course, because ultimately it's their life and they have to live with it. And preparing a child to do that is about setting them up with all the tools that they need and then allowing them to fail, which is just to say giving a child enough space to succeed or fail on their own merits. There's no substitute for learning how to deal with failure, how to address failure with perseverance. And it's much easier for a child to learn that lesson when the failure is related to a schoolyard activity, as opposed to when that failure is the first time they're away from home at college. Here's a little bit of wisdom from Finding Nemo, courtesy of Crush, the 100-year-old sea turtle.
Oh, it's awesome, Jelly Man. The little dudes are just eggs. We leave them on the beach to hatch, and then cuckoo-ca-choo, they find their way back to the big old blue.
All by themselves?
Yeah.
But dude, how do you know when they're ready?
Well, you never really know, but when they know, you'll know, you know? Oh.
Children who are overprotected grow up to have much higher incidences of anxiety disorder and depression and lower self-esteem. I talked about that a little bit last week, specifically about children who, absent the achievements they had to celebrate and to be proud of, were being made to be proud of the things they are rather than the things that they have done. One of the things that a child needs to be exposed to in order to achieve is the opportunity to fail. Absent a meaningful contest between the child and his potential, there is no opportunity to fail, and there's no opportunity for the child to learn how to persevere and better himself. And the reason that that often gets taken away from kids is the desire of an overprotective parent to minimize that child's exposure to disappointment. That's the whole idea behind a participation trophy, so they won't feel bad they didn't win. They got a trophy anyway. But children aren't stupid. They know what that participation trophy means. So it's just the parent or the teacher or the school or the instructor shielding the child from a necessary lesson that is actually doing much more harm than it is any good. And it's interesting to try to explore where this tendency to be overprotective is coming from. One of the likely factors has to deal with fertility rates and birth rates in the United States. So in the 1800s, when some 15% of the population lived in rural areas, a typical family was having anywhere between 6 and 7 children. By the time the 90s rolled around, you had most families having anywhere between 1 or 2 children. So in the 1800s, you could have a family that said, well, Mary got bit by a rattlesnake when she was 3, Timmy fell down the well, the dog didn't come get us in time, and Bobby ran off into the forest and got eaten by a bear. But Michael and Alice and Susan are still here, so we are a happy family. By the time the 90s rolled around, there was only little Bobby. He was the only child. Not only that, but everywhere on television, children were getting kidnapped or pulled into gangs or you name it. And we couldn't risk poor Bobby. After all, he's the only child. And as technology became more readily available, not only was Bobby no longer allowed to stay at his friend's house, but now he's got his cell phone on him, and I want you to text every hour. And by 6 p.m., if you haven't texted me in the last 15 minutes, I want to know where you are, or I'm driving over there, and I'm going to come get you and make sure that you're safe. Back in the 1800s, of course, Dad might take Bobby into town and tell the missus, I'll be out for a couple days to get to town, and I'll come back, and she might not think of worrying until 2 weeks had gone by and they weren't back yet. Now, if Bobby's supposed to be back at 6 o'clock and by 6:10 he hasn't answered his text messages, something terrible must have happened. So in a sense, it's not just the children who aren't being afforded the opportunity for disappointment and failure and how to deal with it, but it's also the parents not being forced to be in a position where they can start trusting their children. If they're never going to have to trust their child, they never learn how to let go. If you haven't seen Finding Nemo, there's a scene where Marlin, who is the overprotective father of Nemo, running into our friend, the 100-year-old turtle, Crush. Here's a scene where Crush's child, Squirt, puts himself in some danger and Marlin freaks out, but Crush knows better.
Oh my goodness!
Whoa, kill the motor, dude. Let us see what Squirt does flying solo.
Whoa! That was so cool! Hey, Dad, did you see that? Did you see me? Did you see what I did?
You so totally rock, Squirt! So give me some fin. Noggin. Dude.
It seems so obvious that even a cartoon gets it right. But presented with the same situation, our biological imperatives kick in, and if we are trying to protect a one and only child or a precious one of two, then maybe our tendency is to be overprotective. And that's not saying that If the child wants to find a radioactive spider so they could get Spider-Man's abilities or develop some kind of immunity to electricity by sticking a fork in the electrical socket, we shouldn't stop them. But robbing them the ability to learn from failure, where the mode of failure is not death or grievous injury, is an injustice. Still, this overprotectiveness has consequences that are far-reaching. A lot of this translates into children who are maladjusted when they become young adults. And in the case of the 11.5 million single mothers, some of this has to do with the fact that there is no father figure in the household. This is a difficult thing for a child. The mother is typically the nurturing parent. That's not always true, of course, but by and large, that is the mother's role. And for a single mother of an only child, and especially one that may be struggling, it is even more likely that she is going to be overprotective. The situation is such that maybe she is sacrificing a large part of herself, and in this case, every egg is in a single basket. And again, the philosophy of anyone who believes in individual liberty understands that that person, that mother, that single father, that child is in circumstances different than their own. And while it is really easy to judge, especially based on only the factors that can be seen, and making no excuses for people who have made really poor decisions, once again, we circle back to the children are not at fault here. And I'm a very strong believer in that every child has the right to the opportunity to screw up their lives in their own good time without any help from anybody else. That is to say that nobody, including their parents, should be screwing up a child's life before they get the opportunity to screw up their own lives, or hopefully take a different path. So the question is, what is there to be done? What are we to do about it? How can we remedy the fact that there is an entire generation that is growing up that is lacking in greater and greater numbers father figures in their lives? And the answer to that, I think, is rather than be judgmental, that we act as examples, and those of us who are fathers be better fathers ourselves. And that is learning how to be a good father. That's an ongoing thing. That is a path. That is not a destination. And part of that is not just being good father figures for our own children, but being good father figures in our community. That doesn't necessarily mean volunteering to be a coach, or volunteering to be a scoutmaster, or volunteering to be a big brother, though those things certainly don't hurt. Part of being a good citizen is understanding what you would like your fellow citizens to be like, and leading by example. Part of being a good father is understanding the type of adult you would like to know, and giving your child, or a child in your life, the tools and whatever wisdom you have managed to scrape together in order to become that or be on the path towards that. Winning hearts and mind and changing culture doesn't happen by dropping pamphlets. It happens by winning a heart or winning a mind one-on-one, one at a time. And being a good example and being a good father or a good father figure is definitely on the path towards winning a heart or winning a mind. And if you have the resources, there's always adoption. There are plenty of kids who need actual fathers and actual mothers in their lives. And if you are not quite ready to do that, but still want to volunteer some of your time, www.volunteermatch.org can hook you up with hundreds or thousands of charities that are looking for volunteers, and several hundred of those specifically are directly helping children. So I hope everybody had a nice Father's Day and celebrated Father's Day with a father or father figure in their life or with their child or children. And I leave with this. A picture of Bill Gates with his 92-year-old father was posted recently by Bill Gates, and he had this to say, quote, "My dad and I share the same name. After starting Microsoft, people used to ask him if he was the real Bill Gates. I always hope he says yes. I hope he tells them that he's all the things the other one aspires to be. Happy Father's Day to the real Bill Gates." If you've enjoyed this program or found it informative or enlightening, please subscribe. The Civil Moment podcast is new, and your support and involvement is greatly appreciated and absolutely vital if we are to continue doing this. Listen to our podcast on iTunes or SoundCloud and leave a review. Our audio is now also available on YouTube. Follow us on social media at Facebook or Twitter. Like and share our podcast announcement. It all helps. You can contact us by sending an email to podcast@civilmoment.com or visiting us on our website at www.civilmoment.com. Thank you. Until next time, I'm Vong, and this has been A Civil Moment. This podcast, copyright 2018, Phase Final Incorporated.